Cover page number 4, series number 4. So, as is something that obviously I'm going to be talking about with all of these, is like this, of course, moves from like one character moving them forward so that way later on when we find them again in the story, when we meet them again in the story, it's like, oh, not like, well, how did that character get there? It's, okay, so that's like lining it up here and like kind of setting up. We've seen that with Kobe and Hamepa. We saw that with Buggy, meeting Alvita and all of that stuff. Now this is kind of one of the main ones that we end up following that is an enemy at the time that they kind of start the cover story. And by the time we end up meeting them again, they've kind of gone through a bit of a transition. So this one is Hatchan Seafloor Stroll. Not that there aren't others that kind of go through this. Django, I guess, kind of, but that he becomes a Marine, so he's still technically not on the same side as the Straw Hats. But with Hatchan, by the time this finishes up, he's gone from being one of the antagonists in the Arlong arc, and gone through so much everything, and then by the time we get to Saba Odie and all of that stuff with everything that happens with Kami and Duval, which I'll go over at the end of this, he's kind of he becomes an ally at that point in time. Do you want in the room, Chip? Is that what you want? Come on. You can't come in the room. I'm gonna close the door. Alright, Chip. I know. You're a good boy. Up, Chip. Up. Up on the bed works too. So this is Hatchan's cover page story. And this takes place pretty much any time between the end of Arlong Park all the way up through Saba Odie, or the beginning of Saba Odie, simply just because of what it entails. So this ran from chapter 1182 all the way up to 228, had 40 installments. This part was never animated, as is most of these. And so at 40 installments, this is actually the second longest pre-time skip cover story. It was only surpassed by Mrs. Golden Week's Operation Meet Baroque Works, that, and focuses on a single one. This focuses specifically on Hatchan and, his misadventures type of thing. So that's what we got here. So the short summary of this is that this is Hatchan manages to escape where Arlong and the other ones are captured. After Arlong Park, Hatchan ends up managing to escape, and eventually he ends up finding his way to where he meets two new friends, Kami and Papagu, and they eventually end up running a takoyaki stand. It is essentially the very short, abridged version of this. Now we're going to go through the longer version of this. So, cover page 1. We see a Marine ship, and there is a figure. This Marine ship is an unknown place. We don't actually ever figure out where this Marine ship is. It could be in the East Blue. It could be in the Grand Line. We're not sure. Last place we knew of where, Arlong and everything were, they were in the East Blue. We do not know where Arlong is. Currently, that's a whole other thing that is, hopefully will be resolved at some point in time. Since he's one of the other main villains from East Blue that were kind of I would like to find out what happened to him, given other things we have learned. So, we see a 6-armed figure jumping off of the boat and ends up, into the sea. Cover page 2. Time to go home. So the first one is jailbreak, and it's time to go home. So it is revealed that this figure is Hatchan, who is, of course, one of the former members of the Arlong Pirates. At this point in time, they've kind of been dissolved. And he was the fishman, the octopus fishman, who had been a member of Arlong's crew. Later on, we find out that there's a much more of a past there with, the Sun Pirates and Jinbei and Arlong and Fisher Tiger and all of that stuff. And Hatchan was there for a lot of it. And, so we kind of learned some of that. much later on during Fishman Island. But at this point in time, the main place that we know Hatchan from is, of course, from Arlong's crew, and he very much was an antagonist there, where he had very much been, fully aware of like Arlong keeping Nami as essentially a slave and not really doing anything about it. And what ends up happening is, of course, so at the end of that, Arlong had gotten defeated by Zoro, very badly injured. At this point, he seems to be mostly recovered from his injuries. We still see some bandages on him. And he has decided to leave his pirate days behind him, and he's just going to roam the seafloor for a while and see where his true home is what Hatchan has decided to do at this point in time. So, 3. Hatchan saves a panda shark. So, Hatchan ends up coming across this panda shark who is, caught on a fish hook. Hatchan helps, remove the fish hook from the, panda shark's snout. Panda shark, just one of these other random animals that ends up existing in the One Piece world, like the Island of Rare Animals and a bunch of other ones that we've seen that are just very interesting types of animals that Oda has come up with. 4. Hatchan gets meat as thanks. So Hatchan ends up, following the panda shark is thanking Hatchan and ends up taking him back to his den and stuffed with all sorts of items from the human world. And the shark gives Hatchan just some type of meat. Side note, in this one, we also actually end up seeing a devil fruit in the fridge of the panda shark. This devil fruit has still never been identified. So many chapters later. Actually, almost 1,000 chapters later, because this is chapter 185. It's like almost 1,000 chapters later. We still don't know what that devil fruit is. Don't know. So, Logia, Paramecia, no idea. It's in a shark's fridge in the bottom of the ocean. I don't think anyone's going to eat it for a while. Hopefully the shark doesn't. So what ends up happening from there is Hatchan, number 5, Hatchan sets off, and he ends up at the surface, and he ends up coming across this nearby tiny island where there is this shipwrecked man. Hatchan meets a hungry man. There's a shipwrecked man, and he's starving. So Hatchan gives him meat, doesn't try to help him go home. It's like, I would have been like, okay, I appreciate the meat, thank you. Can you help me get home? Can you help me get to some other landmass around here that I can, maybe try to find a way to get home? I understand Hatchan can't take him back to, like, Kokoyashi Village or anything like that. That would be a bit too, no. But, like, he could have taken him somewhere else. But he gives the starving man food. Fair. And 6, Hatchan gets a ring as thanks. So this guy somehow has like this ring. The guy has recovered enough to fish for himself, so he ends up finding this ring. And he gives it to Hatchan as a parting gift. This kind of shows that Hatchan has decided to turn away from the way that Arlong treated people. Fully is like, maybe humans aren't so bad. So we'll touch on that again later. So Hatchan swims off, and now we have number 7, the goldfish princess who has lost her ring. So we end up meeting. Hatchan ends up finding his way as he's traveling around on the seafloor Stroll. He ends up finding the Goldfish Empire, which I believe I covered briefly in one of the Miscellaneous Kingdom videos that I did. I think I slightly mentioned it because it's like, oh, it's a goldfish princess in a kingdom, so I mentioned her. And they have this princess there who's just very sad because she has lost her ring. Said ring is the one that Hatchan happens to have that he got from the guy. So she's like, oh, that's my ring. Number 8. Hatchan gets a golden trinket, a golden trident as thanks. So Hatchan gives them the ring back. It's just like, oh, well, this is your ring. Okay, here you go. So, it's the wedding day. So it's, it's her wedding day. So she needs her ring to get married. So he returns the ring, and then he ends up getting like a gift. It's this beautiful trident. It's like golden trident. And so it's like, okay, that works, I guess. Thank you. So he heads off. Number 8, a giant sea bear began crashing, being chased by a sea monster. So a sea bear is kind of one of those, like, the first kind of instances that we get of, like, one of the sea beasts. Or it's a sea boar, excuse me, not a bear. Sea boar. It's kind of one of the instances of, like, the various sea beasts that we have seen in One Piece. They're a little more prominent during Fishman Island, and then they did get touched upon during Egghead with, like, the mechanized sea beasts, so we've kind of seen them a bit. And this is a sea boar. Is swimming around and it's being chased by just some other type of a random sea monster, just one of the sea kings. And, just part of the sea floor. It's just like, and yep, sea boar. And sea king. Okay. And number 10. Hatchan saves the sea boar. So Hatchan, just reminding of Mumu, who is the sea beast that they had. The sea cow that they had. He's possibly reminded of him. He interrupts the circle of life. I'm not going to start singing Lion King. Interrupts the circle of life, and he slays the Sea King with the new trident that he has. So he saves the sea boar. Number 11. From inside the sea boar's mouth. So Hatchan watches as the sea boar is, like, struggling with something that's in its mouth, like choking, and like it's trying to not, let out what's in its mouth. Number 12. Kami the mermaid and Papagu the starfish. So, the boar just goes, just like essentially shoots Kami and Papagu out of his mouth. It's a mermaid and a starfish. And Hatchan is shocked to see this young mermaid and a starfish. Evidently, the sea boar was trying to eat them. Didn't work well. They kind of fought back. That would come up again later. Gets shot out of the sea boar's mouth, and they burst free. And we get to 13. The shadow that approaches Hatchan after he saved them from almost being eaten by another fish after being eaten by a fish. Exceedingly long title. I don't know why. So it's like, still puzzled. Hatchan nevertheless accepts the mermaid Kami's and her starfish friends, that's Papagu, thanks for being rescued. They're like, thank you so much for helping us. Unnoticed by all three of them, there is a figure that peeks out from behind a nearby rock. So it's like, this figure shows up. So now we have 14. Introducing the Macro Fishmen Pirates. So, the figure spying on Hatchan reveals itself to be another fishman, and this is Macro, who leads his own pirate crew. We'll get to Macro in a second. So, moving into 15. Reunion with dear old friends. So, despite apprehensions from Kami and Papagu, who are just kind of like, okay, maybe don't talk to them. Don't talk to the Macro pirates that just showed up. Hatchan just embraces Macro and his gang as longtime comrades. We find out much later on during the Fishman Island arc, when we're getting the Queen Otohime and Fisher Tiger flashback, that Macro and his two underlings were members of the Sun Pirates. They were friends of, Fisher Tiger and Jinbei and Arlong and all of them in the Fishman District, and they were some of the members of the Sun Pirates way back when Fisher Tiger was the captain. And what ends up happening, what we saw in the flashback, of course, is like, everything that happens with Fisher Tiger and him dying, and the crew, splintering, where it's like Jinbei stays in control, becomes captain of the Sun Pirates, and a good chunk of the crew stay with him. Arlong goes off, and he takes, Hatchan and Karubi and Chu and a bunch of the others with him, and they end up making their way to the East Blue. And then we have the Macro Pirates, which we find out later. They are very notable for attempting to abduct the mermaid Kami 31 times. Yeah, they've tried to go after Kami a lot, which is disturbing. It's like, you guys need a better hobby, and not human trafficking or mermaid trafficking. we'll touch on that in a little bit. There's another thing I want to bring up with that. But so this is where like the three, we find out later that this is, the three, the Sun Pirates split into the three bits. And the Macro Pirates are actually the smallest of this group because the Macro Pirates, I believe, barring like the single member pirate crews like Kuma and Mihawk where they don't have anybody else on their crew, it's just them out wandering around as pirates or sword fighters. Father looking for a cure for his child. Take your pick. Creepy man in a coffin boat. The Macro Pirates are actually the smallest crew. Although, by technicality, the smallest crew of pirates have technically actually been like Luffy and Zoro, but that only lasted for like not even a day, if that, before Nami kind of attached herself to the crew. And then, of course, everything that happens in the East Blue happens in the course of like maybe a 2-week time span, if that, give or take, from the time Luffy leaves to when they head to the Grand Line. Doesn't take super long for all of that to happen. So they're not a very small crew for very long. But the Macro Pirates have been a pretty small crew for quite a while. So that's kind of what's setting up there. So, of course, Hatchan knows who Macro is. They're old friends. And Kami and Papa go like, okay, maybe not, don't, no, maybe not, trust him. So then we have 16. Surprise, Kami, deal to the fishmen for a takoyaki map. So, the old friends, the Macro Pirates, putting, his old friends, Hatchan puts his old friends, the Macro Pirates, before his new friends, Kami and Papagu, that he just met. And essentially what happens is Macro just ends up handing over a map and being like, hey, I'll give you this map to this really promising, legendary takoyaki recipe if you give me Kami. And Hatchan is just like, yeah, he's like so blinded by that. He's like, oh, sure, yeah, here, take her. And he takes the map and he swims off. Kami is now captured again by the Macro Pirates. It's like kind of embarrassing that you can't catch one mermaid. But again, Team Rocket spent how many years trying to actually capture Pikachu and succeed in it? Where they actually were able to deliver Pikachu to Giovanni. 20-something. So now I'm moving to 17. Search for the legendary Gaikuma takoyaki recipe. So Hatchan practically just flies across the sea. He is just like following this map to where it is supposed to send him. And he's just dreaming of just untold culinary delights at the end of this new map that he has been given. He's just like so blinded by that. He's just like, I gotta go find this takoyaki stand. I gotta go find this recipe and all this stuff. So that's where he's heading. Very, very single-minded, focus-minded on this one. Tunnel-visioned is what's going on with him right now. So he's just going off that way. Then we have 18. Propose one more time to the darling Octopaco. So Hatchan is recalling this former love that he had, which was very much a one-sided one, where he was like head over heels for this fishwoman, Octopaco, who is, I believe, actually, I think the only canon-named female fishman that we have seen in the series. She's at the very least the first, and I think she's the only one that we've seen that is like canon. That's not just like some random side non-canon character that we've seen. She is the only like canon one. And she had, she was like this beauty. We learn a little bit more about her later on. She's like a celebrity, grew up as a celebrity and like, in the Fishman Island and like the Fishfully Hills and other places where she was like very famous. And Hatchan had this crush on her when he was younger. He was in love with her. And she had rejected him because he had made inadequate takoyaki, and he hopes he can still win her heart, is his hope. Yeah, that's not going to go well there for you, Hatchan. 19. At the map's end lies the great octopus mash. So, Hatchan has made his way through the rest of this map, and he has discovered that the legendary takoyaki recipe leads to a huge, furious beast that is a giant frickin' octopus named Mash. Okay. So, that leads into 20. Hatchan's wrath at being fooled. So Hatchan concludes that Macro has tricked him, and Hatchan just flies into a rage, and he beats the ever-loving crap and senses out of Mash in the process. This poor octopus, it didn't ask for this. He just beats the octopus up. I'm like, just stop. Please stop. From there, we have 20. Where are they? So Hatchan has now rushed back to the spot where he had, met with Macro, and, gone through all of that. And he's looking for the gang, but they're long gone. And Papagoo is sitting there, and he's just like crying and like pointing the way to where like they took Kami. So again, this is Hatchan being just like tunnel visioned, and he's just like, oh, wait a minute, I got tricked. And so now he's like not happy about being tricked. Fair. I wouldn't be particularly happy about being tricked and sent into the jaws of a giant furious octopus myself. I would also hopefully have not made the trade of, here, send this girl that you just met into potential slavery with kidnappers for a map. Even if it was from a friend. Beep the chip. I beep Chip. I beep you. What are you gonna do about it? He's like, I don't know. I'm Chip. Okay, now we have 23 or 22 mermaid selling macros. So the macro pirates are riding high on their victory of catching Kami again. And she's in this special compartment on their ship that she can't get out of. It's like Kami proof, mermaid proof. So this is, of course, one of those things that very much is touching on one of those very dark subjects that One Piece tends to touch on a lot. And in this case, I think this might be one of the earliest references to like the slave trade that's in One Piece, where, eventually, of course, you have, because like when we're, of course, going through Nami's backstory, we don't really get that much of like what has happened with Arlong prior to ending up at Kokoyashi Village. It's just he shows up at Kokoyashi Village with, all of his crew, and they've enslaved Kokoyashi Village, and they kill Belmere and all of that stuff, and they take, enslave Nami essentially. And, and they do all of that. And like we don't learn about that. Like we don't really end up fully learning about what's going on with like the slave trade in One Piece until we get to Sabaody with everything that happens there. And I'll be touching on that more later. But like this is kind of like one of those first instances where it's just like, why are they kidnapping the mermaid? That doesn't sound good. That does not sound good. So there's also this other side of this where it's like, when it comes to Macro, who was part of the Sun Pirates, who had friends who had been former slaves who found out that his captain, that Fisher Tiger, had been a slave, that he is still trying to sell someone of his own section, his own tribe, his own race into slavery. So it's like there's just strange things where it's just like, despite his strongest feeling against slavery by most fishmen, Macro and his group are just, their objectives is just like, no, we're going to sell the mermaid and other fishmen as slaves. Additionally, they were members of the Sun Pirates who, kind of, that's just a lot of, and to be fair, throughout history, when the, transatlantic slave trade was going on, there were lots of tribes in Africa who would capture Africans from other tribes and then sell them into slavery. So it wasn't selling their own people into slavery. It was catching other people, possibly enemies, sometimes just innocent ones, catching them and then selling them into slavery to the transatlantic slave market. And like that was the way that they built up a lot of money for their people. And then, of course, they eventually got turned on. And it's just like, this is like, fishermen, fishmen here who are just like, oh, hey, why don't we capture mermaids and other fishermen and we can sell them into slavery and we can get money. Maybe not. Again, it's not like it hasn't happened in history where there weren't other groups of people that did the same thing to people who looked remarkably like them. It's not like they didn't do the same thing. So, yeah, unfortunately. So, 23, Octopus Punch. So, Hatchan has managed to catch up with the macro pirates somehow. And he just easily destroys their ship with just a fury of his punches because he is just so angry about the fact that they, like, tricked him. And he just destroys their ship. 24, you cannot trick me. And it's just like, he has freed Kami, much to the relief of Papagu, who I assume followed Hatchan, and it's just, oh, Kami! So we see them reunited. And it's just like, he also just beats the ever-loving crap again out of, like, Macro and his subordinates and his two subordinates. They honored the deal, much to Hatchan's confusion. So he's like, what do you mean that you honored the deal? What? The map. The map led me to the weird octopus that I had to fight. You were going to send me to my death. So, but, you know, it's just like, you traded this girl, and Macro's like, but you gave us the girl and we gave you the map. The map is supposed to lead you to, you know, sauce or whatever for your takoyaki. And Hatchan's like, oh, wait a second, it was? It really did. There's really sauce there. Yes? Please don't beat us up anymore. To be fair, you kidnapped a girl. You deserve what you have coming to you. And what ends up happening is 25. The best cooking sauce found. So, Hatchan, with Kami and Papagu, has now returned to where Mash was, the octopus. And they find that they were being honest after all, that there is, like, inside of the octopus's hat, because the octopus has a hat, is a jar of the perfect takoyaki sauce. Sure. So, they weren't lying. They're rat scoundrels, but they weren't lying about that. So, 26. Both treasures acquired. No one can stop me now. So, with this huge, with a bigger haul than he would have ever dreamed, the legendary takoyaki sauce, the perfect meat, the giant octopus that he just beat up, and a heap of treasure from Macro ship, Hatchan races off to propose to Octopaco. So he's just like, oh, yeah, I've got everything that I need. Okay, we're gonna go do this. 27. Octopaco was out at the moment. So a preening Octopaco has gone out on her own seafloor stroll, carried by an entourage of blowfish, because reasons. So, as I said, we do technically end up seeing her in the Fishman Island arc. So she is a celebrity girl who grew up in the Grooverly Hills, so like Beverly Hills. She dreamed of marrying a prince, so she dreamed of, like, marrying one of, Fukaboshi, Ryoboshi, Momboshi, one of them. Dreamed of marrying one of them so she could become a princess. Despite this ambition, however, she has never set foot, or whatever, in the Ryugu Palace. She has never been anywhere near the palace. And actually, during Fishman Island, when we see her at one point, she is angry that the Straw Hats are being invited into the castle, into the palace. She's just angry about that because she's like, I've been striving my whole life to be invited in there, and now these random pirates get invited there before I do, type of a thing. So there's that. So we have 28. Too bad. The headband Fishcat village crushed by a sinking ship. So Octopaco, on her little stroll, palanquade stroll, has found this devastated village of the headband catfish, and she's just mocking them, mocking the survivors of this destroyed village. I'm just like, the F is wrong with you, girl? She's just like, they're mocking them. She is demonstrating her character of just like, she is just mocking these other people who have done nothing to her. 29. Hatchan comes to the starving catfish village. So, Hatchan, along with Kami and Papagu, have, he's, not long after Octopaco left, Hatchan and the others have arrived at this catfish village. And Kami and Papagu just like burst into tears at this horrible plight that these catfish are going through. And they're just like, we have to help them. 30. Hatchan's escape. So, much to Kami and Papagu's shock, Hatchan suddenly runs from the village, taking all of Macro's treasure with him. So he's just taking everything with him. And there's like, this man, just why? It's just like, he gone. Nope, he gone. He that way. He way that way. 30. Save the catfish village. Hachi returns. He turns the treasure into ingredients. So Hatchan left. He's resolved himself to help the catfish village after all. He went and he used all of the treasure from Macro's ship to go and buy all the tools that he needs to make this ultimate takoyaki kitchen. So that's what he did. That's what he took all of it with. All the treasure and everything else. He took all of that and comes back with like all of the ingredients and the utensils and everything else that he needs to start making the takoyaki. Go Hatchan. Good job. From there, we have 32. We are now open. Hachi's takoyaki stand. So, Kami and Papagu, as helpers, Hatchan has begun serving this takoyaki by the dozen to the starving catfish villager. So he's just like, here, eat this, eat this. It's just like filling them up to give them food. Good job. Chef Jose Andre would be very proud of you with the World Central Kitchen. He would be very proud of you, Hachi. Good job. Very good. 33. The catfish village is now saved. Now, one last batch to my marriage proposal. So the catfish village has been, fed. Kami and Papagu are resting, and Hatchan has one batch of takoyaki left that he will give to, Octopaco is his intention. 34. Octopaco is attracted by the smell of the sauce. So, Hachi rushes to give Octopaco the last batch of the takoyaki. But, Kami and Papagu are leery. For a good reason. As Octopaco still cares nothing for Hatchan himself, she's just like, I can get the takoyaki from him. I can, try to woo him, and then I can steal the recipe or steal the takoyaki, and I never have to put up with this man again in my life. Again, she's scheming, and like Kami and Papagu are like, I don't trust her. 35. A catfish elder who came last. The catfish elder who came last. So, Hatchan is giving this beautiful declaration of his love to Octopaco, and it's interrupted by one last customer, the elder of the catfish village. And 36. Octopaco punch and the elders smile. So Hatchan, making the right choice, gives the last batch of the takoyaki to the village elder. This receives a grateful smile from him and a furious beating from Octopaco. So Octopaco is just like, screw you, just beats the heck out of Hachi. Yeah, no, Hachi, that very much tells you the type of person that she is. She would rather have this food than give it to this person right next to her who is starving and whose village just got destroyed, and she laughed at him earlier. So no. Hachi, she's not good for you. She's not worthy of you. You're far above her. You've done some questionable things in your past, Hatchan, but you're getting better. She is far below you. Leave her alone. So, 37. Hatchan and the sunset. So, Hatchan, just his chances with Octopaco are just ruined for good. And Hatchan has resigned himself to this fate. So, him, Kami, and Papagu are on this little island. And they're watching the sunset, and they're trying to console him. They're just like, it's okay, Hatchan, it's okay. There are more fish in the sea. You'll find someone else, it's fine. Type of thing. They're, consoling him, which is adorable. So, 38. Under the warmth of the setting sun, remembering the dream of a takoyaki stand. So, Hatchan falls asleep with Kami and Papagu there, and he remembers the humble childhood dream he and Karubi shared to run their own takoyaki stand. So Karubi is, of course, one of the other members of the Arlong Pirates. He's, I think, kind of the stingray, manta ray looking fishman that Sanji ends up fighting. Yeah, because Zoro fights against Hatchan, Sanji fights against Karubi, and then Usopp fights against Chu, and then, of course, Luffy fights against Arlong. So that's kind of, that kind of like reveals that they were childhood friends. So we get that. 39. The Catfish Village shows its thanks. So, the next morning, the Catfish villagers reveal themselves as excellent shipwrights, and they build an entire ship for Hachi to sell takoyaki on. So they just make him this great takoyaki stand ship that he can use as gratitude. And I love that. That's just so nice of them. They and Frankie would get along great. Frankie would be like, these guys are super. Frankie would love these guys. So we have 40. Chapter 40, the conclusion. Grand opening of Takoyaki 8. So, with new friends and a new lease on life, Hatchan sails off toward new adventures. So, this is, of course, just kind of concluding this setup here. Hatchan, Kimi, and Papagu are now, friends, and Hatchan has, like, this new determination. He's like, I'm going to put my past of what happened with Arlong behind me, and I'm going to sail the seas with my new friends, and we're going to sell takoyaki to people. Said the octopus fishman selling takoyaki, which is octopus fritters. Because reasons. And of course, Takoyaki 8 is a reference because Hachi is his name is a reference to like 8 in Japanese. So that's where that ends. But we are going to touch on the aftermath of like kind of where that leads Hatchan into when he enters the story again for the main part of the story. So much later, after this, the Straw Hats, of course, they are on their way to the Sabaody archipelago. And they end up running into Kami and Papagu. They end up helping them escape from one of the sea beasts. I think it's a sea rabbit that they get them out of. And, so the Straw Hats meet them. And they're like, oh my god, it's a mermaid and a talking starfish. Both of you are interesting. Keep going. So they go through that. And then, of course, they end up finding out that, Kimi's like, my friend's been captured by the macro pirates. Can you get, and the flying fish riders, can you guys help me get him back? And they're like, sure, we can come and help you with that. So they kind of end up, there's like a Denden Mushi call that ends up happening where like flying fish riders, I believe, are the ones who call the Straw Hats. And they're like, hey, we got your friend's friend here. Come and get it back if you want to try. And they're like, okay. And like, they hear Hachi's voice on there. And like a bunch of them, like, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, they're kind of like, that voice sounds familiar. And Nami is the one who, like, I think instantly clocks that it could be Hachi because like she spent the majority of her life around Hachi. As with working for Arlong, she has spent the majority of her life that way. And so, like, Hachi, Karubi, Chu, Arlong, all of those voices would be ones that she would, like, be able to recognize in an instant. And so she's like, well, I can't, she's, like, thinking, and, like, you can tell, she's like, I don't know if I can confirm that this is Hachi, but it certainly sounds like him. So they make their way to the Flying Fish Riders' base. And it is revealed that it is Hachi. And the others are kind of like, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp all kind of look toward Nami. And they kind of give her the option of being the one to decide if they go and rescue Hachi. Because the others, like, Chopper, Robin, Frankie, Brooke, they don't know about Nami's past at that point in time. They don't know about what happened at Fuchsia Village, or at Kokoyashi Village, all of that stuff. They're not really aware of that yet. And even if they were aware of that, that doesn't mean that they would know that this fishman is one of those fishmen that was part of that. So, Nami, like, she kind of like looks at Kami and Papagu, and she looks over at Hatchan, who is like clearly trying to like hide himself. He's like covered himself in ink to like try to hide that it's him. And Nami's kind of like, I mean, sure, yeah, we can save him. He was not, I guess he wasn't as bad as the rest of Arlong's group, so sure, yeah, we can save him. He doesn't deserve this type of a thing. And so, they go through everything. They save Hatchan. They defeat the macro pirates and the flying fish riders. And Tufal gets his facelift with Sanji and everything. So then it ends. Part of that ends with, them on the takoyaki stand. And it's, Hatchan, Kami, and Papagu are like, to return to the takoyaki stand and start making their takoyaki again. And, they're making it for the Straw Hats. And Sanji's very impressed with it. And they're going through everything. And, Hatchan, Nami's kind of sitting off on her own. We have, like, Usopp, Luffy, and, like, Sanji are the ones sitting at the main bar eating the takoyaki. And Nami is, like, kind of off to the side. And she's sitting there and she's eating the takoyaki. And Hatchan is kind of like, so how's it taste, Nami? And she kind of, like, she kind of, like, looks at him. And, like, Hatchan's like, it doesn't mean that you forgive me, I swear. I just want to know if you think that it tastes good. And Nami's like, I haven't forgiven you yet. But this does taste good. And that just makes him very happy. That makes Hatchan, he's like, Hatchan has recognized that he's like, I would have to go so far to try. I have to do so much to atone for what I did, for the way that I let Arlong treat you and your village and your parent, and your mother and your sister and all of that stuff. I have so far that I have to atone in order to make up for that, in order for you to view me as anything but just a semi-hesitant ally at the moment. And he's very grateful to them for helping Kami and Papagu and for getting him out of there and everything. And so we have that happening. And Nami, she's like, I haven't forgiven you yet, but this is very good takoyaki. So she's like, yes, the takoyaki is tasty. And of course, the full thing that concludes this is, of course, when they are at the human auction house and Hatchan is shot by Charlos. And Luffy punches Charlos for shooting Hatchan. Or we have this moment where it is, which is just, I just swear, it's one of my favorite moments in One Piece. Not just because Charlos gets punched in the face, but it is kind of this thing that fully shows this redemption thing. Because, like, the rest of the Straw Hats are there. Nami sees what happens to Hatchan. She's horrified by it. And the rest of the Straw Hats are horrified by it, too. And, Luffy states that Hatchan is his friend. And when Luffy says that, Luffy means it. And he punches out Charlos. And, of course, they take care of Hatchan and all of that stuff. And, Hatchan helped, get them to Rayleigh and all of that stuff. So, we get, like, those connecting dots there. And then, of course, we get back to 2 years later. Hatchan has spent the last 2 years protecting the Thousand Sunny while it sat in the Sabaody archipelago, sat in the groves. And Hatchan has kept it safe. And, of course, we see him down in Fishman Island because he's kind of, like, setting up the whole thing of, like, they're going to come through and everything like that. And this fully shows because, like, Hatchan is interacting with Hody. And, Hatchan is trying to convince Hody to just stop this. Going down Arlong's legacy, this path that Arlong went down, is not worth it. And he explains that, the Straw Hats are my friends. And I'm not going to go down Arlong's path again. I'm not doing that again. They are my friends. And, like, we see that through the rest of Fishman Island. We haven't seen them for a while. I don't think we saw Kami, Hachi, or Papagu during any of Vegapunk's message. That would have been a nice thing to see, but I don't think we saw them at all. They got, like, a cameo in film in, like, Stampede at, like, the festival there. They got, like, a cameo there selling their takoyaki, which is great. But, like, we haven't really seen them since. I don't believe we've seen them really since they left Fishman Island. I think they pop up in maybe one of the other cover page series for, like, one page, but that's it. So, we'll see how that goes. But, and I might touch on that later on, because if they pop up in another cover page series, and I will mention them there. But I like that this shows of just like how Hatchan starts off as this antagonist at the beginning of the series, as as an enemy in Arlong Park, and by the end of it, like at the moment, he is now very much an ally to the Straw Hats. He is very much their friend and their ally, and it's awesome. And like he's gone through so much. Great. He has very much grown as a character. That is very much showing that character development, and I love it. So that's what we have here. I thank you very much for watching. Yes, Chip, I'm just getting finished. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.